So really it's about mental health. And I want to talk for a minute about the intention that we set before of carrying a message to future generations, the future us. Let's actually talk about that for a minute. Like, it's a little philosophical, but
I think that makes sense. It is. I think that is. Yeah, we're planting seeds for our own future, and whether that's, our children, or if you want to get into the idea of like future incarnations or anything, like just, the idea that it's all kind of one, we're all one humanity, and it, whatever we do to help ourselves, it's going to help everybody. And it becomes a good motivator, because it isn't just about like, little me and, me feeling better, and that, even though that's important, it's just like, it starts to kind of globalize, and we can connect with everybody, in different ways. But ultimately it is that loving intention, and, to actually resolve suffering instead of just mask it or just put up with it.
I'm joined with Michael Thielmann again. This is the second podcast that we're doing together, and Michael's helped get the ball rolling on this whole podcast situation again, which I'm super grateful for. So thanks for coming back into the studio.
Oh yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. I haven't been that comfortable doing this kind of stuff, but you make it really easy, and I've gotten a lot of good feedback from your other work, and it's just a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, that's interesting, exciting, cool. I don't know what this. It's I'm grateful. I'm grateful to everybody watching. I'm grateful for you to join and have the conversation. The idea of future versions of us listening in on this conversation, or incarnations, or whatever have you. We're all interconnected, and it seems like that's an important part, is to be able to share where we're going and where we've been, so that we can hopefully learn from our past experiences. And we're going to talk a little bit about your story and your own journey in mental health and the psychology industry. How do you say that?
Well, I guess the psychiatric institution, and I guess, you can't talk about that without kind of bringing up big pharma. And, I'm not even, like, it would be easy for me to throw them under the bus, but I just want to be as objective as possible and just say, what kind of worked for me, what didn't, and, like what I'm kind of doing now to help kind of get to the root of a lot of those traumatic memories, and just kind of the reason that I got into seeking medication. And I also had an experience with electroconvulsive therapy, which is conventionally was called shock therapy, and just kind of the desperation that kind of drove me to keep seeking answers there, even though when I was 18, I kind of had the sense that it wasn't really working for me, like, being on multiple medications, and just sort of outsourcing my well-being, and just kind of feeling like, and I would kind of listen to doctors saying like, you should just keep kind of trying medications and see what works. And so I just kind of kept trying them. But ultimately I felt like it was more about meditation than medication. And I did have a psychiatrist actually tell me to start meditating, which I hadn't been really doing for a long time. And when I was in the hospital, and I think I made a few attempts, but I was kind of just, I was kind of all over the map, and I was kind of just drug seeking, to be honest.
When somebody says to meditate, what did it come with? Some guidance or some tools or audio videotapes, or what did you have access to at that point in time? Where did you start your meditation journey? And then we can get back into the root of the suffering. Maybe not the root, but the symptoms of your suffering at that time. And some people might be able to resonate with that. And again, the idea being somebody along the way will stumble upon this and have an opportunity to maybe resonate with some of the experiences you've had, and to maybe gain some insight for themselves. I mean, we're not sitting here as doctors, but you've got your own direct experience with some of these, the pharmaceutical and the psychiatry avenues that people can take in this day and age. And I think it's pretty profound, the way that you're able to describe your experience, especially with the shock therapy, and describe the experience, that whole experience, whereas others might blank out on the experience, and it's like a gap. And I think that's part of your experience. We'll get to that. But just to hear it, to hear it as if we're in your shoes for a minute, and what can we learn from it? What can we do differently? And are there more appropriate or different avenues we can take that are maybe a little bit more in harmony with nature, or, when we get into the symptoms, are we just trying to fix the symptoms? Does that actually address the solution? What is that root cause of suffering? So I think I jumped a little bit too far ahead, because I was going to go back to what you were originally experiencing, but there's one more thing in there, and I already, my brain might have went too far on that one.
Oh yeah, no, that's okay. But like in terms of like I did experience, I had tons of anxiety and depression from a young age, and then I did see a hypnotherapist, and she kind of taught me like a meditation technique to just kind of I would kind of just give myself that I'm calm and confident, and like the breathing, just focusing on breathing, and it was very effective, but. I think I started practicing it like at recess or something. And I remember my friends were laughing at me, and it was kind of like a stigma against meditating. And so I said, okay, this is, it's more important to be liked than to, my own well-being essentially. So I kind of just gave it up. But I do remember distinctly okay, this is working. I can just sit here and, tell myself that everything's okay, and just be breathing, and not have to get over involved with all the thinking that was going through my mind, and just learning that detachment, and I think I took to it pretty quickly, and it was just kind of a self-consciousness that led me not to keep doing it regularly. Even though the evidence was almost immediate that it was working.
What were you doing then? You were just sitting for a short period of time, breathing and giving yourself affirming thoughts that things are going to be okay?
Exactly. Yeah, that kind of thing, just, like the breathing, and even the act of just closing my eyes. I think that made a big difference, because, being very visual, and it's I was always looking for danger. It's I'd kind of be, looking around. It's oh, when's the next thing that I have to deal with going to happen? So just kind of consciously, having my eyes closed, and, still being aware of my body, my breathing, and, kind of telling myself something comforting, instead of, because I'd always, go to my mother and be oh, I'm anxious. And, she would kind of calm me down. But ultimately I had to be I had to kind of take that power back, and, learn how to soothe myself. And I think I was put on medications at different times, and I don't think I really resonated with any, they didn't seem to help mostly. And I kind of felt the side effects pretty, immediately. So I had a big resistance for medication, but at different points I also became very desperate for them, just because of the, the magnitude of the depression and anxiety, and, even psychotic symptoms, which were mostly caused by, cannabis use, as I probably mentioned in the last one. But so it was kind of this kind of big, drug seeking thing, whether it be street drugs or pharmaceutical. But that meditation piece was always in the background. Maybe I can just, do that more often. And when I made a concerted effort to practice every day, it was a marked decrease in suffering, basically, And then I would say that to my doctors, and they'd say, "Oh, well, you need to keep taking your meds." And sometimes I would go off them very quickly, and that would have its own repercussions, because I didn't, taper off. But it was sort of this back and forth thing of okay, I don't know if I can handle this much, mental anguish without, without medication. And so it's just been a process kind of back and forth. But once I kind of made that commitment to do those practices regularly, ultimately I was able to let go of the medications.
Mm. When you introduce the medications into it, either the cannabis or the pharmaceuticals, specifically the pharmaceuticals though, did it end up ramping up the feelings of anxiety, or when it relieved the feelings, did you just miss it? Like if it wasn't around or wasn't available, like, you know what I mean? How did it change your overall experience, or did it, having introduced them into your life?
Well, that's a good question, because each medication, was different. It felt like some of them were just kind of numbing, almost like zombifying or something. Like I just felt nothing. But at the same time, I was kind of aware that it was just repressing everything. And I think at one point I took lithium, which that seemed to have a pretty powerful effect. It felt like it kind of synced up the two hemispheres of my brain or something, which initially was pretty relieving. But then after, a short time, it felt like it kind of just, numbed me out again too. And there was I was on this other newer medication. I can't remember the name, but I just remember waking up like laughing hysterically, which had never happened. And I'm like, and then my ex at the time, she's like, "Oh, this is not good. Like this is obviously not." And it's because I was just as a kind of an experimentation, and I put my faith in, in just whatever was available. And sometimes I would initially feel that relief, and then, the biggest thing was drugs like benzodiazepines, which I found very habit forming, and because they did provide immediate relief, and and then using cannabis obviously was just adding fuel to the fire. And so it just became this really unmanageable situation, at different points, and basically all because I was outsourcing my well-being, to others and substances. And I did see a lot of therapists and counselors. So it was just I was always just waiting for the silver bullet, I guess. Like whether it be a medication or somebody to say something, or just kind of give me the answer. But and I ironically I had been given the answer, was to just kind of go within myself and learn how to love myself, and not give in to these thoughts, and that kind of thing. So ultimately it just kind of was this long, arduous journey that just is leading me back to myself, and kind of letting go of that obsession to get instant gratification.
With the drugs, pharmaceuticals, even cannabis, what some were more addictive, like the benzos, they have addictive properties, or like we have the capacity to become addicted to anything.
Mm-hmm.
What's your take on that?
Well, I remember when I was doing a practicum for social work, and I did do a little pharmacology, and they, like benzos, when they first came out, they were said to not be addictive, but that seemed to be kind of a pattern, like as a new class of drugs was released, they would kind of market it as though it were not habit forming and wouldn't have side effects. But I found with benzos, it definitely did create a compulsion to keep using them. I think it did feel like part of that was physiological, but I think the biggest part is psychological. But all I remember was being in the psych ward, and just almost be begging the nurses for it, and they would be telling me, why don't you do your breathing, or because they were teaching those coping mechanisms. And then I basically just copped out and said, I tried, it doesn't work. Just please give me my drugs now. And then they would eventually give it to me. But I remember in the background, I was thinking, like, this is not healthy. Like, what am I doing?
Was it a physical craving for them, or just the mind wouldn't stop muttering that you just needed them?
I think I would say probably 90% would probably be the mental aspect, or if not like the whole thing, because I didn't really have physiological problems when I stopped. So I think I would say it's the majority for sure, is just mental, and just needing instant gratification, or thinking I do, and kind of just giving up on myself.
When it comes to addiction forming habits and even substances, what is it about the mind? And this is for anybody, because I mean, shopping can be addictive, right? There's a physical reaction that ends up like I can get sweaty and just start like feeling really uncomfortable in my skin, and I just want to take away that with maybe I'm craving ice cream and I gotta go get it, but I'm starting to feel these physiological symptoms that I'm equating to more excuses and reasons that I have to fulfill whatever it is that my mind is craving. What is it about, or how is your experience? Just maybe the more that we can all relate to, it's about awareness. It's just being aware of ourselves at the end of the day, our own reactions that happen within us, and then being able to get through it without having to seek some solution or remedy. Like maybe we can go down this path for a minute, and then we can come back to the experiences you've had with the different modalities and pharmaceuticals and psychotherapies to try to relieve these symptoms. And then we can eventually come back to the more natural side of things. But from your own experience, these habit forming moments, what's going on inside of you? What's going on inside mentally and emotionally, and how do those two things connect, and how did your awareness grow in all of your experiences over the years?
Well, I think the biggest thing is when I start believing my thinking instead of just observing it. So there'll be a thought that comes up and says, you need a benzo, or you need cannabis, and instead of kind of having discernment, being like, oh, that's just a craving, that's a thought, and the kind of emotional aspect of that kind of whatever that sensation is, like, oh yeah, that kind of movement, like I need that, and I'm seeking it, and just basically not being willing or able to observe that, and just sort of giving in, because the kind of reference of the instant relief that I would get became almost all consuming. So instead of just taking a step back and saying, okay, well, maybe this isn't really the best option, and maybe I can just start breathing and just sort of, go through these feelings, it becomes this kind of, it's almost like a do or die situation where I kind of hold myself emotionally hostage, and I feel like if I don't get this in me, I'm going to die, basically. And and even having suicidal ideation, ironically, it's kind of like that's still that fear of death, or needing to have instant relief of some kind, and just not having the patience to go through what I'm going through, and just kind of feel the emotions. Because ultimately I feel like that is a big part of the answer for me, is just learning how to just kind of process emotions, and not have to act out or repress them.
Is there an end? Is there an end to the feelings? Like, I get into moments where the clock starts ticking slower and slower and slower, and trying to breathe my way through something I'm feeling, and I eventually end up just caving. Like, I'm trying to do anything I can to distract myself. I gotta go to a movie, I gotta get out, I gotta eat some sugar, at something, right, to change the way I'm feeling. But I've been curious, is there, if we persevere, and maybe there's tools we can lean on, like even a phone call to a friend, but if we can actually make it through the other side, maybe it's not just us trying to do it on our own, like, but is there an end? There's got to be an end. Like, nothing lasts forever.
Well, exactly. These feelings won't. Well, I think in terms of all the the spiritual modalities, they do talk about the end of suffering, and it's easy to think of that as some big ultimate thing, but lately I've just been kind of learning how to observe, moment by moment, and it's like, okay, let me see how long I can sit with this feeling of anxiety. And, sometimes it gets more and more intense for a time. And then it'll kind of, it'll be like peaks and valleys. And so, and then later I'll look back and like, oh, I was really anxious a while ago, and now I kind of feel, boredom, and then, that'll start changing. And then all of a sudden I'm pretty happy. And then it's like, oh, I better keep that, right? It's like I earned that happiness from all that all that other stuff, and then the happiness, then that changes. So I feel like that is the process, just seeing that change, and then but also developing a confidence that I don't have to act out. Like, even if my mind is screaming at me, like, you need something, right? Like, I need something right now, or I'm gonna die, is basically I feel like that's kind of the underlying thing. And then say I do give in, and whatever it is, say I eat the sugar, and it's like, okay, then there's that moment, like, okay, I got it. I got what I wanted, which is like the subsiding of that thought. And then pretty soon it's like, okay, now what's next, right? So just that process of craving, feeding into the craving, indulging the craving, and then the mind manufacturing a new craving, which is, more often than not just based on the past. So it's like, then I'm basically living in the past. I'm living from memories of what granted me temporary relief, but at the expense of my own self-awareness and, even self-respect, because, sometimes I would do very things that I, almost cringe now, like, picking up cigarette butts or, stuff like that, or just to get that moment, right? That nicotine hitting the brain, and then, okay, the whole thing in my head stops for a minute.
So if it jumps from one substance to another, what's that root of suffering, or what was it that you were trying to fill? Or, I mean, that's a deep question. I feel like that's too big of a question to even ask right now, but maybe we can start with that and then look at some of the things that you were trying to do.
Well, like, I think, it does talk, in terms of, the spiritual connection, I feel like ultimately it is that higher power that is the only thing that can, fulfill that void I have. But it's kind of this experimentation of like, oh, maybe, this will work, maybe that will work, like different ideas of what might work. And then certain things seem like they would work for, short periods, and or even, longer periods. Like, I was addicted to video games, and, that seemed to work for longer periods, where I just wasn't really thinking about myself and just kind of zoned out. But then ultimately I would be like really aware that I was playing the video game, and kind of aware that I developed a tolerance to it, whereas before I'd be like lost in the game. And that also kind of carried into substance use, where I would be acutely aware of the fact that I was just self-medicating, and I couldn't just kind of go into the substance experience anymore because I had too much self-awareness. So it's almost like the awareness ruined it. It ruined the addictions.
When you go into the experience that you're trying to fulfill and you talk about a higher power, that really, that seems really profound and big, that maybe we're going through life right now with so many stimulations. Like, there's so much to, if the human nature is to seek pleasure, avoid pain, conserve energy, as my coach Donna Skoglund would say, those three things, seek pleasure, avoid pain, and conserve energy. Well, there's a lot of things in this world that will give us pleasure, right? From video games
absolutely.
to movies to food to, like, there's no shortage. And yet, if there's something deeper there, at what point? I hear this recently. I hear this with even some younger people playing video games, that eventually that doesn't, it's not fulfilling anymore. There's only so much seeking and chasing that you can do, but not everybody's on a spiritual path necessarily. So I'm kind of curious, will everybody end up looking for something a little bit more or something a little bit deeper? Or, what percentage of people are totally content with just plugging themselves into the matrix, getting, their brain stimulated with a dopamine hit, and that's it. Like, as long as you can, preserve the body for as long as it could be alive and just give the electrical impulse into the brain, that's some sort of dopamine rush, then that's it. That's the rest of your life. But that's a trap in itself, that you're not going to go on this spiritual journey anymore, because now it's just trapped in the instinctual level pleasure seeking. And I don't even know if the pleasure would continue to work, because at some point the brain sets the bar for the dopamine, and it needs to get more and more. Like, maybe there's a limitation to how much dopamine stimulus the brain can actually take before it needs more, and then it just gets accustomed to it. And there's a point where it's just not stimulating enough, and maybe at that point we need a bigger brain that can handle more dopamine, right? I'm not sure. Or is that where it starts to become the beginning of the end, and I need something more, I need something deeper, and maybe the veil starts to be lifted, that there's something else here that can be way more fulfilling, but that becomes the beginning of the search. And when you said higher power, it just feels like a spiritual search begins. When did you become aware that maybe there's something more that could relieve the suffering than just the cannabis or the pharmaceuticals?
Yeah, well, I think the awareness of that was interspersed even with all the seeking, but I didn't let myself really go into it deeply enough to get anywhere at certain times. But by the time I was 18, I was acutely aware that there was, for me, that there is this higher power, which is loving and all pervasive. And I told myself I need to realize that, I need to embody that, and that's going to be the purpose of my life. But because I had these other these counterintuitive impulses to, keep seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, and what was the third one again?
Conserve energy. Yeah.
Yeah, because like the energy expenditure of, meditating and, doing spiritual discipline, that felt like a big investment. But, using cannabis felt really easy. So it felt like I was conserving energy and getting pleasure and, covering up the pain. So, but then ultimately that, like you say, with the dopamine thing, I think that makes sense. It's a diminishing returns. Because even if hypothetically I was in an infinite pleasure machine that was just arbitrarily stimulating my brain, I think that would happen ultimately. It's like, okay, well, it can't get any better now. It's just, and then there would be this kind of flash of awareness, like, aren't I worth more than this? Like, what, there's so much potential that I'm not expressing. I'm just like a brain in a jar, and it's like, I think ultimately there would be that awakening for any being, although it might take a lot of time for certain people, but I feel ultimately because there is that one ultimate reality that I feel it is calling us back to itself, and so ultimately nobody's lost forever, but it can go on and on, because of the nature of the world right now. With all the permutations of substances and technology, and, as artificial intelligence gets, ramped up, then that becomes, more and more fascinating for certain people. And yeah, but I feel ultimately there is this kind of, impulse in everybody to go back to that source.
When you were younger, what kind of goals, what kind of dreams did you have? What did you envision your life looking like when you were younger?
That's a good question. I kind of switched up my aspirations. I wanted to be a fighter pilot, in the military. And then I realized I was, deathly afraid of heights and airplanes in general. So I was like, yeah, I would come up with these really outlandish things. Like, I wanted to be like a secret agent. And I came up, all these kind of exotic things. And then I kind of wanted to be a scientist. I was good at music, and I ended up dropping it in grade 10 because I wanted to take physics and chemistry, and which I didn't really enjoy them. I enjoyed music. So I was kind of living in this kind of schism, or mentally I was telling myself that I needed to be doing certain things, or that I'd get somewhere doing them. But in the meantime, I was good at other things, which I kind of judged as less than, so it's kind of this dual life, I guess, projecting myself into something which I wasn't really living. So that was actually a big source of suffering, was having all these fantasies that, didn't seem possible on some level. And in the meantime, not having gratitude for what I was naturally good at, and, my actual gifts, just kind of feeling like they were just drudgery, until I stopped doing them. And then I kind of in hindsight realized, oh, that was important. And that's been a good opportunity now to reconnect with that. And creative writing was very important. And I was very good at that at the end of high school. And then I kind of gave it up for a while. And then I started doing that, as a job at one point. And that was kind of satisfying. I was actually using a gift and, being compensated. But usually what would happen is I get to a certain level and then sabotage it, usually by, using some substances or just getting distracted by other things like technology or something.
What was guiding you? What was kind of moving you along the path in the early days of like switching from art to science, for example? Like, was that the way that your family was guiding you? Did you have some role models? It just seemed like if you're going to be successful in the world, this is the way to go. Or was there something else inside of you that just kind of switched over and your interest expanded in physics instead of music?
Well, I was in a more academically based high school, and I feel like it might have been some peer pressure or just there was this kind of sense that music wasn't as important, or it's kind of just like a hobby. And I had a fascination with physics in terms of like I wanted to understand how everything worked. But looking back, I've realized my fascination was actually in metaphysics. Because when I was learning conventional physics, I felt like it kind of led me into a way of thinking that didn't correspond with my experience of the divine and reducing everything into a particle and everything matter being the ultimate reality, essentially, that matter is the basis of reality. And I was kind of going in a direction where I felt like, that consciousness was more fundamental than matter, because, and then I said, okay, well, that doesn't matter. I have to just learn this anyway because it must be true because I'm learning it, and everyone's convinced, and and just kind of feeling like, well, wait a minute, my heart is leading me in one direction, but intellectually I'm kind of trying to force something here, and trying to learn calculus, and which was fascinating because the concepts of infinity, like trying to like kind of map infinity, or measuring rates of change. But I wasn't very good at it. I was fascinated by it, and but ultimately the fascination just led me more on an inward path. So instead of like outwardly studying math or science, I just said, okay, I'm going to start studying my own consciousness and seeing how my mind works, and and especially how how suffering gets created, because that was all. I'm just thinking like, well, how am I going to end my suffering? And I thought, because I was pretty high achieving academically, so I figured maybe that would be the answer. But I would get, even when I got on the honor roll and stuff, I just felt so empty on some level. It was just, and then I'd get like money or something from my grandmother, and keep it up, and then I would keep it up, and then ultimately I gave up on academics and just became this kind of pothead philosopher, which was kind of relieving for a time, but ultimately that was just another escape, of course. So
when did the cannabis come into your life, and how did it ramp up to that point of, did it deter you from continuing to study, or like, did it start to consume more of your time, or what does that picture look like? Like, was that the beginning of trying to find avenues to alleviate some anxiety? Was the anxiety ramping up as you got into college, or it was kind of always there?
Well, when I was 17, I smoked marijuana for the first time, and I just remember feeling so much relief, and it did take away all the anxiety for a while. And so that would be like the kind of the latter part of high school, and eventually I was smoking it pretty much all day, every day, and then I was still kind of interested in academics, But eventually I started getting really overwhelmed, and it was like I was going into kind of psychosis, and I would have a lot of anxiety even with all the marijuana. And so then I almost didn't graduate high school. I had to take classes at home and do some other extra credit stuff. And I kind of lost interest in a lot of the academics. And then I was realizing that, pot wasn't working, and I ended up going to treatment when I was 18, and I was abstinent from it for about 6 years, and then I picked it up again when I was with these people that said were very spiritual, and they were using it for, they said, spiritual reasons. So I said, well, I should probably be okay now, right, after 6 years. So, but it was actually worse then. The consequences became worse. So yeah, it was very difficult because I just seemed to refuse to learn from my own mistakes.
What was the psychosis, and how did the amount of marijuana you were using, or did the amount even factor into that, or was there just a moment where you woke up one day and it wasn't having the same effect anymore?
Yeah, well, I think as my use increased, then I would have these very outlandish and kind of crazy thoughts, that I was very important and I was on this like spiritual mission that kind of made me more important than other people. So a lot of grandiose thinking, and it was kind of proportional how much I was using it, and it became completely all consuming. I just living in fantasies and feeling, if I don't have this, cannabis, then I don't know what I'm going to do, because the anxiety became, more overwhelming because I was constantly suppressing it. So then like the rebound effect, that's what actually led me into, going to psych wards was, after I would stop using cannabis, the effect of having all that repressed stuff come back, more quickly than I could deal with. And, then I would try to do like meditations and, go through those emotions. But eventually it was so overwhelming that I'd go to the psych hospital and, be on prescription medication for a time. So that cycle repeated itself a few times.
Mm. And how did the amount that you're using beyond that change? Or you went 6 years without using, so what was that experience like? How was your life and quality of life during that time?
Oh yeah, well I should say that, because it was actually very good. I had a stable relationship and was working, and I was doing recovery and that, and just kind of working on myself, and I had hobbies, and like not maybe right away, but by maybe the third year, things were looking pretty good, and I could kind of feel like this is really working. And then I had a breakup with the woman I was with, and that kind of prompted me to go back to the cannabis. This is kind of the next iteration of that cycle, and then it just got even worse. But I feel like that was kind of an important thing to kind of realize that this whole thing isn't working. It's not just, I can't just be abstinent for a certain period and then go back to it. Like I have to be fully committed to a better way of living. For me, that doesn't involve substances at all.
So you had connected with some people that were using cannabis spiritually. When did that change? When was it not really spiritual? Right away did you see that, or that took some time? And when you picked it up after that relationship breakup, was that a spiritual journey?
Well, that's the funny thing is I always told myself everything was spiritual. Like that was the big justification, So like whatever substance I was using, it was for spiritual reasons, Like I would drink 6 beers in a row, and then I would start talking to God, So it's okay, right? I'm spiritual. So and that couple that I met, they were also using others, salvia or something, which they said, oh yeah, this is a gateway into higher dimensions, and so it was like confirmation bias. So felt like, okay, they're okay with it. They're functioning, so I should be okay. So it was kind of just that, that justification, and I just kind of, I bought into my own thinking, and just let myself be influenced by others. And, it's not about blaming anybody else or even myself. It's just sort of the process that I had to go through.
Looking back now, is it all necessary to lead you to where you are today, or maybe that there would have been a different path that had emerged had you taken different, I mean, that's true for all of us. If we make different choices, we'd go down a different path. But like, where even letting somebody else hear this when they're on their own journey, and like, we can alleviate suffering maybe a little bit sooner if we hear each other's stories, but we got to learn the hard way, or maybe there's a gift in here, your future self, your reincarnated self years down the road. What would you want to share with your future self from this experience?
Well, I think the big thing would be to learn from mistakes as soon as possible, and also retain a sense of self-autonomy or sovereignty, rather than outsourcing to peers or authority figures, and basically to just develop that intuition, and not have to feel like more suffering is necessary. Because talking about needless suffering, I feel like that's kind of what happened. It was putting myself through the same needless suffering a few times, instead of just kind of learning the lesson and really embodying it, instead of just having intellectual agreements with myself and others, about that, oh yeah, this is no good for me and I shouldn't do it. But I wasn't really living differently and, healing on a deep level. It was sort of just lip service a lot of the time.
Can you articulate that with an example?
Yeah, well, that's a good, basically, I would just tell people, I would just talk about how destructive cannabis use was, and that I shouldn't use it again and all that. But in the back of my mind, I was kind of thinking, it'll probably be okay if I, manage it properly. Or so and then there would be these, very deep, painful things coming up. And then I'd remember how soothing the cannabis seemed to be, temporarily. But at the same time, I was just telling people what they wanted to hear, and and I was even working as a youth counselor at one point, and I was using cannabis and telling them how bad it was, So it just became this completely hypocritical, division in myself, which was, really painful, because I wasn't walking the talk at all,
When you started using it again after the breakup, how did it start to ramp up then? How did it escalate?
Well, basically what happened was, because on some level I was staying sober for that person, and then I kind of had free reign to do whatever I wanted. So, I was using LSD and drinking and smoking tons of cannabis, and then I almost immediately met another woman who, completely helped enable me to, live that way. And then I remember feeling like I'd reached the peak of happiness that's possible, like kind of like that dopamine thing, where I was with this beautiful, I felt like she was she is beautiful, but I was kind of just infatuated with her, and just getting high off being with her, and and the substances, and she could let me just do whatever I wanted, basically, whereas previously I felt like I was restricting myself. So that created this kind of so-called freedom, which eventually just led to this big crash and breakup quite quickly also, because I wasn't being loving to, myself or my partner. I was just indulging my ego and, using her, and just not being authentic. So.
What is it so if you got complete freedom, is that just to live and do as you please? Like, you can go out any hours of the night, use whatever substances you want? Like, what does that look like? And why would we need some sort of, what would the opposite be? Like having self-discipline, or trying to live with certain boundaries, not being completely abundantly free. Yeah, hedonistic, sure. What do you think that the consequences are of having absolute freedom, or when do we need to hold ourselves accountable, and what's the sort of lesson there with relationships, especially, and where we need to have something for boundaries for ourselves, for self-respect that allows us to show up in the world without just being like, I feel like this is a big part of the culture wars too, is this battle between, well, you got the 10 Commandments that came out of the Bible, and then this concept of free will that says, well, why would God tell me what to do? I've got free will, so that's a limitation. I should be free to just express myself and live absolutely however I wish as a human being. And religions have ruined it because they've put on these restrictions. Yet, meanwhile, you get modalities where people embrace self-discipline to try and reach a higher potential by challenging themselves. So where's the balance in all of that? It's not just about being completely free and doing anything we wish, but we've got to hold ourselves accountable too, don't we?
Yeah, well, I feel like that is important. Yeah, in the cult, what's happening now, it's like, well, we can really see the limitations of that so-called freedom of where I can just do whatever I want, and because ultimately that, I don't feel like that is freedom, because it still involves, enslavement to desire, and it doesn't bring satisfaction. So, but and then the idea that God wants us to choose out of our own freedom to choose Him. And he doesn't even make, it's obviously not forced on us, even though in religion it the coercive aspect of religions, and what causes people to rebel against them and then go into hedonism. But ultimately, I feel like there is a balance about self-discipline and not denying ourselves pleasure, but learning how to temper it with discipline, with authentic connection, and not letting it completely dominate us, and just kind of balancing everything, which is not the easiest thing, at least in my situation, because I tend to just go from one extreme to the next. But ultimately, I feel like I think we will find a middle ground, and we'll learn how to have that higher connection and still be able to enjoy our humanness, but without the that kind of insatiable ego aspect.
Yeah, I had a few relationships where I didn't know how to manage my own emotions with spending time with a beautiful woman and thinking, well, if I don't show up in the right way, maybe I'll lose this. But I had to go through some personal growth too. That the latest thing I heard about how a healthy relationship would be just sharing the experience of life together, not being in a relationship because that person fulfills, like, I don't need somebody else to fulfill me, and that is what's going to make me complete, but I can show up complete and go on a journey of happiness, that we can ride this ride of life together. Right, instead of out of balance relationship where so I think maybe just from my own experience, that's where the fear has come from, of like, wow, this experience is really great and I don't want to lose it, and then the mind starts chattering away about oh no, what if I'm going to lose it? How do I not lose it? And then it's just faith versus fear, hey? Like,
oh, exactly. Yeah, like, I mean, in kind of recovery now, like I felt like, oh yeah, I could, I'm doing a lot better. I could really use a relationship. And then it's like, okay, I have to really look. It's like, what is it in me that wants that? And what do I hope will happen, in a relationship? Because I don't see people that are in relationships being blissed out of their mind because they're in relationships. It's it brings its own difficulties or challenges, and it does take a lot of work, which I admittedly in the past I didn't really put in that work, and I had high expectations of being fulfilled by somebody, and maybe I would just do the bare minimum. But yeah, so lately it's been about, okay, how what can I bring to the table, and just kind of be complete in myself, and and then that, I feel like that is the way to attract the right person. But it's kind of ironically that it'll happen when I don't need it to happen.
Where are you at now? We're still getting to the part of your journey where you're trying different pharmaceuticals and psychotherapies to try and relieve the anxiety and whatever ails you. But where do you find yourself right now on the journey, and what keeps you motivated and going each day at this point?
Well, I feel like the main motivator is to just reach my full potential, which I feel like is sort of this God-given blueprint in a way, that it's kind of like we have that freedom of will, but there is sort of the kind of guidance that is innate, and just kind of tuning into that, being like, okay, what's the best thing I can do right now, and what brings the most passion and peace or positivity into the world. Being service to others oriented has been really important, because I was never really able to be of service because I just was completely consumed by selfishness. And then coming back, the pharmaceutical thing was basically, it's all about how can I just manage this sense of identity that's so crazy that I have, and trying to dampen it down. And when I did electroconvulsive therapy, it was like they would put me under general anesthetic, and that was the most peace I could have, just fading away. And then just trying to get rid of myself kind of through those means.
Can you walk us through that experience? What led you up to making that decision? How was it presented in your life? Where did you learn about it?
That's because at one point I was going to do it, and I hesitated, and then I had this kind of what I consider a very powerful healer, psychic woman. She told me, yeah, don't do that. Like, she begged me not to do it, so I said, okay, I won't do it. But I did have a severe suicide attempt, and then I was in the hospital again, and then they had this kind of ECT suite, they called it, like, where they would do that for people. And then I said, well, I've tried everything. Electroconvulsive therapy, yeah. And I said, okay, I've tried it. I've done all the medications I can think of, and so, what, I'll just give this a shot.
How long ago before that was this lady saying, don't do it?
Oh, that must have been like at least 5 years or so.
And you had already heard about it, at least, and had brought it up to her, or she mentioned it to you?
I think, I had brought it up to her. I said, is that something that you think would help? And she was adamant, saying, no, don't do it. And, in hindsight, she was right, because I became completely dysfunctional. I could barely speak. I couldn't remember anything. I felt like I was kind of out of my body. And
so you were in the hospital, and they had presented this ECT to you as a solution after the suicide attempt, or just ideation?
It was an attempt. I almost bled out, and my parents took me to the hospital, and then I was just kind of seeking for answers again, because I realized I couldn't even seem to kill myself, so I had to try something. So it was kind of I just said, okay, I'll try anything now. So.
And you got to be in a great deal of pain just to reach that point. And was it, what were you feeling when you arrived there? Just still desperation, or did something shift when your parents brought you to the hospital and it wasn't over?
I think when I got into that hospital, it was just kind of that sense of familiarity, because I'd been in a psych hospital so many times. So it was almost comforting on some level, and I was kind of just talking to people, and it's like, okay, well, whatever, here I am. Just kind of cope with it, I guess. And then I'm not sure who brought up the ECT, but at some point it became kind of intriguing. And but I remember feeling like trepidatious, like this might not be a good idea. And the first time I did it,
can I just ask you, before we get into the whole experience of it, how did you make the decision to do it?
I feel like it was just out of desperation. It just kind of like, okay, something has to work, and so I'll try this. Just kind of grasping at straws, I suppose.
Can you walk us through the experience then? So when you made the decision, what was just take us through that. What happened next? Who came into the room and what happened?
Yeah, so I guess I must have talked to the staff, and then, they arranged it, and then they kind of told me what it would be like, and to, kind of get me ready. And then, yeah, then for my first appointment, I was kind of just laying on a gurney, and then I think they were giving me like some kind of saline solution or something. And then I remember, yeah, being wheeled into the prep room, and then there were like these kind of double doors, like a saloon almost. And then they opened into the where they were doing the ECT, and I just saw a bunch of people on gurneys like twitching, and doctors and techs or whatever like turning dials, and I just felt like am I in some kind of horror movie right now? Like, why am I even doing this? And just kind of looking like, is this like how can I just remember feeling like how can this possibly help anybody? But I mean, and I had talked to some people that it had helped, but that was just my sense of it. And then, they put an IV in with general anesthetic and told me to count backwards. And then I kind of distinctly remember having all my faculties fading away, which was interesting. Like the sense of my mind being quiet, and my senses fading, my body sensations fading, and I contemplate that often, what actually happens there, like when everything vanishes. Like did I vanish and then come back? Because then the next memory is me holding a juice box in the waiting room or something, and then I asked like, oh, when's the ECT gonna happen? And they said, oh yeah, everyone says that it's already over, you can go home. And it's like, what? And then it's like this whole blackout kind of thing.
Mm. And so your sense of sound went, what you could see went, smell, taste, when you say your senses were starting to, what were they, just kind of fading away or just going out?
Exactly. Well, and which is kind of, yeah, it's kind of interesting to look at it, because it's like that chemical just, it completely kind of got rid of everything. It just, I, completely losing consciousness, and there wasn't even dreaming or anything. And it was completely peaceful somehow. And that was the big takeaway. It's like, it wasn't so much the ECT, but it was the kind of semi-consciously experiencing this, profound peace that, because of the lack of anything, the lack of any mental activity or bodily sensation or senses or anything.
Was it the general anesthetic that brought you to that state, or is there any notable moment when they might have actually done it, or there's just a blank spot, like a blackout, like you described it?
Well, I do remember after one of the sessions, I was walking around, and I told my parents, I said, oh yeah, this is working, remind me that this is working if I forget. Because I did feel like that it was almost like a residual effect of maybe that peacefulness. But then later that seemed to diminish, and I didn't really have that anymore. I was just kind of lost in this, fog, I guess. And on the day where I was supposed to do my last session, I remember I got up from the table or the gurney, and I said, I don't want to do this, because I clicked in that this just really isn't working for me.
What did you experience after all those sessions? How's your self-awareness either changed, or do you notice anything comparatively to the before and the after? And how many sessions did you end up having?
I think I must have had maybe 8 sessions or so. Yeah, it's hard to, yeah, because the memory loss is so severe. But I remember years after, I felt like part of my brain was not working, and I really had to do a lot to, heal that, and I'm still doing it now. But yeah, I just have severe loss of memory, and my sense of direction got really off, and I I had trouble, driving, and just everything kind of got impaired on some level. My cognition, my recall, and comprehension, and although there could be other factors involved too. But yeah, I feel like it had a very negative impact.
What was there any positive outcome to it, or did it relieve some symptoms even just temporarily?
Well, I think, yeah, possibly temporarily it would have at least distracted me from the symptoms, or it may have kind of made me more detached or something. Yeah, I mean, I feel ultimately nothing is, wasted, but, the negatives far outweighed the positives for me there. But in talking about like alternative healing, experiencing, other modalities that don't have those negative side effects. That's been really important. Learning how to connect with people that do those. And a lot of it has to do with positive lifestyle changes, rather than kind of just saying, okay, somebody else will just fix me, basically.
In your own experience, can we go down a path where we're just like the mind can be, there's different spiritual teachings about the mind too, because can be delicate, right? And the things that we learn, and if we start being consumed with a particular train of thought, it can be very hard to change that pattern. And it can totally change. There's just working on the Not TV newsletter this week, and it kept coming up, change our thoughts and our life changes. We can change our reality when we change our thoughts. There's a documentary that'll be shared in there, and it was talking about Dr. Bruce Lipton's study of epigenetics and the biology of belief. And when we actually change our thinking, that we can change how our DNA responds to our environment and is activated within ourselves. Absolutely incredible stuff. That was never brought up, was it, from these institutions?
No, far from. I mean, it was very kind of, linear, or not linear, but just very one-sided. Basically, just take your meds, and if you're doing ECT, just do that. And in certain psych wards I was in, there was more kind of empowered stuff about cognitive behavioral therapy, or certain coping strategies, yoga, which was really good. But ultimately, the deeper stuff I was looking for, I didn't find there.
Was it the spiritual void that was really just opening up and consuming you, or can some of this stuff be, and again, we can only really speak from our own experiences, but was there getting that thinking, that train so far into a pattern that there's no really getting out of that train of thought without some external force or some external help? Like, can we meditate and do yoga and manage to overcome some of these deeper psychological patterns?
That's actually, it's a very good question, because my default answer would be like, oh yeah, like I should be able to meditate and do yoga and overcome every conceivable mental, emotional obstacle. But my experience shows that I need to reach out to people and connect, and not make it this kind of self-achieved notion where I have to do it all myself. Because I feel like that's what led me into the psychiatric stuff. Was I felt like I was completely consumed by myself and isolation, and that. And then at least in the psych wards, there's a community of other people suffering. So I feel like we do need each other, and it isn't all about just like being a man in a cave or something. And although that can be helpful to have that alone time, but just finding that balance again.
When does that alone time become too much? Like, it can become a negative. A positive can become a negative if it is out of balance.
Yeah, that's something I've been really looking at lately, because I'll, after work or something, I'll be like, okay, I need alone time. And then maybe I'll have like, an hour, half an hour or something. And then something will be like, okay, maybe I should connect with people. And then if I don't listen to that about the connecting with people, sometimes I can default back into some, depression, and then the desire to connect with people gets less, because I'm like, oh, I'm depressed. They don't want to be around me. And, my mind starts playing tricks again. So Yeah, I think again, it's all about that intuition of, okay, what do I actually need right now versus what is my mind telling me might bring like instant gratification. So just kind of being really honest with myself, like how much well, I don't even want to, how much alone time is too much, or, or am I too, not too connected, but am I around people too much and I'm getting like overwhelmed or something. So I have to, take a walk or something. So just kind of like moment by moment discerning it instead of having like a kind of set thing in my head.
So much of life is just about growing in our awareness, our self-awareness and our experiences so that we can face new experiences, leaning on past experiences, or especially if it's a new experience, being able to get through it and build character, just getting through it. Through all of these experiences that you've had, how much of it now is self-will, Michael's will, your own free will, and how much of it is God's will or a higher power, creator, and how do they both play into the picture?
Well, that's a really good question too. Like I feel like the kind of the ratio of self-will versus, God's will, you know, ultimately gets kind of more in favor of God's will. And that, I feel like that has been happening, as I do these, as I walk this path, just that act of surrendering, Michael's will, which ultimately, hasn't worked. So, which is kind of humbling, right? Like I felt like I could make something happen of my own will, but what tends to happen is if my will comes back, it'll be immediately very painful, on a visceral level. Like, I'll think like, okay, I need this person to do this, and I got to make it happen, or I want to force some kind of outcome here, or which is always about manipulation or kind of being disingenuous or whatever, like not being authentic, just trying to make something happen so I feel better. But by surrendering that, then that is almost instant gratification, instant relief. Anyways, surrendering, just saying like, okay, I don't need to do that. I can take my hands off the wheel and just kind of trust. And and then it's kind of this process, like as the self-will comes up and those kind of volitional ideas of, okay, it's about expectation and outcome, but like why do I need a certain outcome if I'm able to just surrender to that higher power, the loving presence that guides me?
You shared that you have an interest in metaphysics, and for some scientists it might be a hard thing to grasp. It's got to be grounded in factual reality. We're living in a really interesting time because as we learn more about quantum mechanics, there's this opening to an experience of physics. Metaphysics might play into that. I'm not 100% sure how much of it is concept, how much of it is experience, and how much of it is a bridge from old Newtonian physics to this quantum physics. But that aside, I don't want to get all hefty in the science. I'm curious about, so when it comes to letting go of your free will and you talk about surrender, that's pretty lofty, isn't it? Like, even in my own world, it took a lot for me to open up spiritually to a new experience with a new relationship, if you will, with the universe. And this is so unique for every person. So I'm not trying to pad it with a bunch of words that, paints a picture of what God is, quote unquote. I had a huge reaction to that word for the longest time. I wouldn't even mention God because everybody's got their own interpretation. There's all these different religions that have their own interpretation and stories and history with it. So it's not about the division or fighting, but rather our own experience with the nature of whatever this Dhamma is, whatever this, phenomena of the universe, this creator, whatever it is. And I'm just curious what that is for you and what you say about the surrender piece, because is that not weakness? Is that not, how can you give up who you are as a man?
Well, sure. Yeah. Maybe especially as a man in a sense, because it's, like I kind of had that sense of like I have to be, really, self-oriented and just make things happen by myself. And, people are going to rely on me, and, I need to have a family, and I have to be, really strong. And yeah, the notion of surrender, I mean, yeah, it does sound daunting, but I like the definition of surrender is like joining the winning team. And I feel like that whatever that higher power is, I mean, it to me that does feel like the winning side, because it is loving and peaceful, and it doesn't have that, the craziness that I have in my own self will. And my conception of what that is, changed, but ironically, I feel like what it is doesn't change. What God actually is the constant. I feel that is underlying all of the fluctuations and all of the phenomenal arising and ceasing, and that there is this constancy amidst all the change. And that seems kind of difficult to. That's taken me a lot to even get to the point of considering that. Like, how can there be something that's constant? Like, kind of like the ocean, right? Like, the waves change, but the ocean is constant in a sense. So, and, through practice, like, I've learned how to kind of be more and more in tune with it. But it's certainly not a one-off or instant fix. It's just an unfolding.
Are there characteristics of this higher power, this experience in your life? How willing are you to go pretty philosophical here or is this biblical to talk about light and dark and
Oh yeah,
God and Satan, really, like the idea of
yeah. Well, that's
what is that? I mean, what does that even mean to you?
well, like in terms of, I feel like lately, I feel like that reality is ultimately not dualistic. So any notion of evil would be a relative concept, developed by human beings. So the idea of an absolute evil like the devil, to me, it's more of like an archetype for, say, like my own shadow or my own ego, and can become a projection. Like, it's easy. Some people say like the devil made me do that or something, or that, and the idea that the devil can win against God, and there's this battle of good against evil, and who's going to win, and it's very dramatic. But as I kind of go deeper into it, it's like ultimately, for example, if God created everything, then he would have created the devil, and then the devil out of free will chooses to reject God, which is basically just a notion of the human ego saying like, oh, I'm like God, I can do everything, and I don't need that source. I'm self-contained in my own, magnificence or something, and I don't need anybody. And so that separation consciousness coming in.
Hmm. Where do we go from there? Where does one, is it just about the experiences and the awareness, or is there a point to all of this?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I always, like sometimes I'll catch myself thinking like, oh, this is all so pointless, like I was watering plants at work, and like, this is pointless. Like, no one's even eating no one wants this food. I'm just watering it for no reason. And yeah, like, what's the point of all of this? But, that thought just kind of comes and goes. And then in the next moment, I can just be enjoying it, the same activity. And if there is an ultimate point to all of this, I feel like it is just the living of it, moment by moment.
What is God?
I feel like that's something I can't really. I feel like God is what is, just everything, nothing, everything, everything conceivable, just everything all at once, nothing at all, love. I'm gonna just stick with love.
And what's your deepest experience of who you are?
Uh, Basically, a seamless emanation of that one reality. Just and like it's impossible to even describe, but a conscious participant in that one ultimate absolute love and peace.
What would you invite people to contemplate or think about while they have time being alive in this physical form?
Well, the biggest thing I would say is like, well, who are we? What is just the nature of reality itself? What's important to me, values, learning, what makes me happy, even on a relative level. Is my job satisfying? Just really looking kind of in depth at every aspect of life, like what's working, what isn't working, what can I change right now? Am I in like an abusive situation? And, just really taking stock of everything and then trusting, learning how to trust that higher power. I mean, I was an atheist at one point, and I don't know what happened, but it was kind of gradual that just that intuitive sense that there must be something, beyond all this kind of kicked in, and that kind of just drove me deeper and deeper. But yeah, just being really honest and then learning self-love and compassion and just all those kind of transcendent qualities that we can't really quantify or measure necessarily, but that are just so innate in the human being that they're impossible to deny. Like an atheist can fall in love just as easily as a religious person. So, and what is that love? What's the essence of that?
And as we play out this human story individually and collectively, and start to introduce artificial intelligence into the picture too, and technology creates all these new opportunities for new human experiences, whether we combine ourselves with the electronics, become cyborgs, or if we just ground ourselves into nature. Is it possible we can have a spiritual experience either way? Or if I cut off my arm and replace it with a robot arm, am I limiting my spiritual development?
Well, that's a very good question. I had a friend say that she doesn't feel the need to be afraid of artificial intelligence. She would suggest it as blessed as another one of God's creations in a sense, even though it's kind of it's kind of a secondary thing that we create. God created us, we created the AI, so to speak. But it's like, just see everything as part of that one reality. So, whatever choices we make, just kind of see it as, just intrinsically connected with that one, God, the one higher power, and not even make distinctions maybe. But I mean, I have a very strong bias towards nature, and I am weary of technology on some level because I see what it does to me if I'm not careful, and the propensity towards distraction is very powerful. So I feel like ultimately it's like tempering the I think we could use a lot more nature and a lot less technology right now. That I know for sure.
What can you say to all of us about, like, from your own experience with the ECT, for example? The human body is amazing. It's miraculous in many ways, and we can heal from many things that can happen, many adversities that happen to us. I feel like some things just take time, and that's one thing we have on this planet. Maybe time ceases to exist. Maybe that's 400, 500 years from now. Maybe that's next decade. I'm not really sure how our relationship with space-time changes, and do we unlock parts of the mind that now we're quantum travelers going through, or is that all just high-level projection? We still have to live here in the day-to-day. I need to feed my body. I need to take care of myself. I need to spend time with family and friends. So as miraculous as the body is, and we can change and adapt and evolve, the time that it takes to go through some of those changes, if we introduce ourselves to certain technologies, and let's say that I cut off my arm and replace it with a robot arm, I don't know if I'll be able to grow a new arm or if it'll ever be the same. Like, are there some decisions that we can make integrating with technology that it could take the rest of my lifetime to, if I can't just, there's no off switch. I don't set a snapshot and go back in time, undo. What is that? Control Z. What can we learn just from your own experiences? What would you share about appreciating what we have and the decisions that we make, that they have consequences and they have an effect on the path that we're on. And maybe just taking some time to consider or contemplate instead of taking things for granted.
Yeah, well, that's very important. Like in terms of decisions like that, modifying ourselves with technology. I mean, those are decisions that may be impossible to undo in that lifetime. So it's it's very, very committal. Like especially when it comes down to sort of things like the brain implants, or which are probably, I don't know where they are with those now, but I mean, like for example, I sit under a tree and I feel completely regenerated and refreshed, and I'll even put my head against the tree, like almost like in the Matrix, plugging into it or something. And I have no regrets about doing that. But if I were to get a brain implant, I don't know what would happen. Like it's a completely, I'm at the mercy of a lot of factors that, I don't really understand, or, what's the agenda of the company giving that technology and so on. Whereas nature doesn't have that, it's kind of this God-given gift that doesn't have that any ulterior motive. So, I mean, and we need nature, but, and technology is it's derived from nature. So yeah, I feel like it is kind of getting back to that source, more so being in, I like gardening and hiking and that. So I don't feel, when I use too much technology, I feel like I almost have a hangover. But if I'm, spending time in nature, I have the opposite. It's kind of just the experiential awareness of it, the effect.
How does your experience of life change as you spend more time in nature? It's not finding a balance necessarily between plugging into the Matrix or pick up your phone and being glued to your device and then going into nature, getting the dopamine hit of nature, going back to the phone.
Yeah.
And trying to find a balance between the two. Or is it possible that we can over-connect with nature?
That's an interest. Well, I mean, on some level, it's like, how do we get out of nature? Because everything, even if it goes through a big process, like it's all kind of the earth. But yeah, I think we just have to listen to ourselves. I spend probably too much time in the sun, and because I just like it, but I get burned and I've had heat stroke. So yeah, I think everything can be overdone, except maybe being loving. I don't know if that can be overdone, but
everything in moderation, eh? But everything is, at the end of the day, nature. It was an interesting question, just for the thought of somebody out there going, well, I've got my video game to play, or putting myself in augmented reality and being able to see graphics through my eyes all of the time, and when do I put that aside and go to nature? And is the impulse to get out of nature then it's all nature, it's all energy,
that's
it's all the universe anyways.
Well, I think one of the big impulses when I was really into gaming and technology was that I had, nature felt unpredictable. Like I'd walk around, and there'd be a bird, and I'd be like, or get startled by something, or maybe there's a bear, but with that technology, it kind of can give that sense of safety. Like it can be very predictable, and I can micromanage it and, customize everything. And maybe that's the appeal to it on some level, because nature does have a sort of chaos about it. Whereas with the technology we've created now, it can be very linear, or just kind of regiment. Everything's kind of makes sense on some level, and maybe that's the appeal on some level.
It's an interesting time to be alive. I spent a lot of time gaming as a kid too, and so I've got an appreciation for technology, but I also started to lose a lot of my own personal balance and well-being by spending too much time. I think we're more adaptable when we're younger. As a teenager, I could seem to have more energy stores to bounce back and return from decisions that I'd make, whether it was car crash, eating terrible food, staying up all night. It's just the body it was a lot more resilient in, I think, the teenage years. Maybe that's why especially young men have it's a high risk age. I think it's 16 to 26.
Mm.
That's when most people end up doing something that they might never come back from. Because it's just a high risk age group.
Mm. Yeah, well, I feel like taking a risk is kind of, it has this kind of appeal to it. Like it gives, I remember it just gave me that sense of aliveness. So, and then the idea that I could actually physically die doing it, that kind of added to it. So, yeah, I think, it is an interesting time to be alive. And I feel like it is important for us to tune into what works for us as individuals, and then kind of see how how we can serve our society, and just bring our gifts to the forefront, and then not feel like we have to take risks and live on the edge all the time, or it can be a lot more peaceful, I feel.
Well, that has been a great conversation. I, again, appreciate it very much. I'm going to ask you what your final thoughts are and where you might want to take this conversation going into the future, because we can talk about current events too, or just technology or things that are happening, or maybe even we bring on a third person and have a group conversation. Like, this podcast is still pretty fresh, pretty new. We talk about well-being. I keep thinking it'd be great to leave something behind for the next generation, maybe even to get some youth involved and hear their perspective on life. If we can do anything to just help make the world a better place, or be of service to humanity, or do something to, I leaned on radio a lot as a kid. TV, radio, they were my teachers in many ways. So to hear the voices of what people were talking about and sharing helped me learn things about myself and the world around me, some of it better than others. And I hope that this in some way can be a positive and inspirational podcast for somebody out there, and the right people will find it. So I'm curious what your final thoughts are, and if you'd like to take this podcast in any other direction.
Oh, yeah. Well, I just appreciate, the opportunity to kind of express my ideas, and I just hope something resonates with people in terms of their own development, and just to learn how to be loving towards ourselves, and bring that into the world, and connect with people authentically, and just kind of learn how to build a more healthy humanity, for the subsequent generations, but also for ourselves right now. And just seeing that we are worthy of everything. I feel like I limited my self-worth a lot, and just kind of learning to come back to that. So yeah, I feel like I'm open to explore anything, any topic. And I think ultimately I always have the intent of, like, whatever topic we go into, it's like to, for the betterment of people, and to learn how to, heal our pain, our suffering, and, just live the most happy, peaceful, productive lives that we can. So yeah, I just really appreciate it. And I feel like it has definitely helped people already, and it's going to continue to do so.
Awesome. Well, thank you, brother. Much love.
Thank you. Much love.